Welcome to Never Rewrites. I'm Isaac Askew.
And I'm Jeffrey Sherman, and today we're going to revisit the question of end-to-end tests versus unit tests. Isaac, tell us a story.
This conversation comes about again from a recent, a client I'm working with, and they really want end-to-end testing, basically as a response to some incidents that happened recently. And the fact that their testing situation they currently have doesn't seem to work in the way they want it to work. Also, they can kind of see the end-to-end tests play, and that gives them some comfort. They can see, you can visually see, the browser doing things or clicking things, and you give an example of it.
So this is like Selenium, and you can actually sit there and watch the browser move.
Right. It's like a headless thing, if you do it in the actual CI/CD flow, but the fact that you can play it locally and they can actually see the changes, that actually brings a bit of comfort to them too, because it's not just like a bunch of lines on the terminal saying, yep, things are good. It seems more real, I guess. But the incident that happened, I guess there were a few. One of them was a very strange one. We were using Prisma for communication with, it's like a TypeScript package that you can use to type your database and communicate and insert into your database.
So it's an ORM?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And it actually has an underlying package requirement, like a Linux install package requirement for it to work. So for it to be able to insert into the database and connect to the database and everything.
Okay.
So unit tests, like this particular repo actually had almost 97% test coverage, which is pretty good. It's better than most. But interestingly, there was an update to the Docker image that was being used that removed an underlying Linux package that Prisma required. So during the deploy, all the unit tests passed because they weren't actually hitting a real database.
Sure.
They're just mocking it. It deployed, and then everything failed whenever it was being used in production because you couldn't connect to the database. Then we saw the issue, and that has never actually happened to me before. So I thought it was pretty rare that it happened, but it was it was big enough. It took down the API, so it was big enough to be like, sure. Whoa. We need to have some basic tests that this actually is like hitting a database and actually working.
You Docker kids. I laugh because you say that's never happened to me before, and you spun up you did a release and the server didn't have some of the packages installed, and so it failed. Is very common pre-Docker and containerization. So you are very lucky that you haven't.
The fact that image got updated in that kind of way, I'm used to essentially pinned versions of Docker images that are not going to be touched very frequently. So I thought it was, I'd never seen it. I thought it was cool. I mean, it was sad, but cool.
Cool.
So, it spawned a lot of conversations around, how do we test for real? These aren't real tests, essentially, because we don't know if it's going to work in production. And if we don't know if it's going to work in production, what value is it providing us? So that's a huge, disconnect, right? Because there's a lot of value being provided from the unit tests in general. It's just this one particular case of really connecting to a live database that was not caught because we didn't have any kind of end-to-end test to prove that.
Right. Well, thinking for myself, most deployment pipelines have a concept called a smoke test.
Yeah.
Where you do a release, and especially if you're going to do a blue-green release, you do the smoke test, and then you release. So, if you've got in the olden days when you had actual bare metal, you actually had physical machines, not virtual instances of physical machines. You would do a release to one machine, and then you would test on that one machine to make sure it was all good, and then you would release to the remaining servers in your cluster.
Yeah. So this one had essentially a false positive smoke test. There is, as you deploy, there's a health check endpoint to make sure that you can hit the endpoint, which it did serve an okay, like a hello world essentially. Like, yep, everything the service is up and spinning, but that did not talk to the database or connect to the database.
Okay.
So the smoke test that allowed all the different, this is in ECS, so it's like deploying multiple containers, and each of them, if it says okay, the service is working fine as intended because we hit the health check and it said okay, then it will continue to spin up the other containers. So unfortunately, it needed a better smoke test. So we did add that, and this has been a little while back that we added it for this one. But the conversations continue to like, okay, well, we should start writing massive amounts of end-to-end tests because there's all these other things that are tricky to test for, like logging in and what do I see for this package versus that package, and a lot of complicated things that now, because of that miss, the team is unconvinced that unit tests and integration tests can catch all these other particular cases. And so we had this kind of big conversation around like, let's not invert the testing pyramid. There's a reason that unit tests are the foundation, then integrations, and you have indent at the top. And let's make sure too, like, let's not have a knee-jerk reaction to like this failure by doing everything end-to-end tests. Let's like ask ourselves in order, can I solve this with a unit test? No. Okay, can I solve this and prevent it from happening with an integration test? No. Okay, there's no other way end-to-end tests. And if end-to-end tests don't make sense, like if you're trying to make sure that you're testing that in one day a cron runs, perhaps there's a different way to do it, like a manual check, like a person actually has to do it, or checking that a text message went through, or email was delivered, which is harder. You can do it, but it's harder to do.
Or you'd have the service emit a metric, and they'd have something watching your metric server and have an alert if the rate goes up.
But you can see they get more and more complicated, essentially. There's some things end-to-end tests aren't good for. You can make it work, but it might be flaky, or a CAPTCHA might kill it. If you're trying to like, I've seen some people try to like log in to services and check things. So either way, as we had this big conversation of me emphasizing that end-to-end tests shouldn't be the first thing you think of. They should be like the last thing you should do if you have no other choice, almost, just to make sure people aren't writing too many. A friend of mine and I were talking, and I was starting to think, I wonder if this will change in time. Like right now, like what they'll do is they'll add concurrency because end-to-end tests are slow, and then you'll have like this kind of shared state. That way you can kind of restore from a state and share it between concurrent things that are running to make it faster. We ran into this problem years ago at Active Campaign with Ember taking 30 minutes to run. So we introduced parallelism, and there's that kind of concurrency to help the tests run faster. But they're still slow, and end tests are infamously slow. And I was like, well, wonder what will happen if writing tests, like end-to-end tests, become easier. Like right now, I know the service Testum lets non-tech people log in, hit record on their browser, and they can just record their clicks and then replace what they typed with like a generic thing. And they can write end-to-end tests and run them through this service very easily and very quickly with zero tech knowledge or limited tech knowledge. And I'm wondering, okay, well, if you had a recorded flow, could you let AI watch your video and create its own version of that test? Like, what happens if the end-to-end tests become really easy to write? They encompass a fair amount of the behavior that would have been caught by unit and integration tests because they're touching those same components, and we can confirm visually things have happened. And what if they become faster and easier to write? Does that change? Would this testing pyramid change?
The main thing that the thing that I immediately glom to when you say that is you'd need to have it working and working correctly in order to have AI do that first test. And getting it working correctly without having to stop and write those first unit tests. Like if you don't stop and write the unit tests as you're working, and then, you're like, okay, I've got all this piece of functionality. Now I'm going to record an end-to-end test, and then I'll have AI, whatever, or just have it scripted. You still have to get that thing working correctly, manually. And the bigger of a chunk you have to do that, the harder it is. So if you write a whole workflow page You either have to stop and do an end-to-end test for every single piece,
Mm-hmm.
because here's the problem that I see is you can't rank an end-to-end test until you have some level of confidence that the test works, right? Like you can't. I never write full TDD. I never write the test failing and then make the test work.
Mm-hmm.
I always write the piece of code and then write the test to prove that the piece of code does what I think it does. And if you don't have a working UI,
No, okay.
uh,
Perhaps more context is needed.
yes,
This is a hashtag, I mean, an asterisk working system that needs test coverage. So half the
mm-hmm.
things there already work. Like I can create an invoice, or I can do this, or I can do that. But they were just never tested. Like, I mean, like the customers test it daily, basically, and
Right.
report it if they change or if regression happens. But these are just things that already, for the lack of, they essentially work, but they're just nobody ever wrote tests to begin with. So whenever they do releases, what they'll do is people have a spreadsheet and they manually QA each
Mm-hmm.
piece. And so now they're like, okay, well, how about we just like, for all these 30 steps that we're doing, just write end-to-end tests for everything, and then just have a massive suite of end-to-end tests that cover everything. And then my counterpoint is a lot of the things that are breaking can be caught by unit integration tests, but I'm speculating of what if there's let's pretend that writing end-to-end tests becomes incredibly fast to run and incredibly trivial to write, such that a non-engineer, like a product person, could
Mm-hmm.
record a flow and say, "Yep, this is still correct." What's bad about that? Does the testing pyramid change if end-to-end tests become exceptionally efficient and easy for a non-engineer to write?
The testing pyramid at best would become a square or a cube.
I see.
Like
Okay.
you wouldn't, if you could have AI write all of your integration tests or end-to-end tests, and it was cheap and free
Mm-hmm.
and fast, which it probably will never be all those,
Mm-hmm.
but you'd still need all of your unit tests at the very least. Would still be your foundation. You'd still need to have all those individual units. And you'd still need to work with them. You'd still need the tests
Yeah.
because you'd still need them to help you write the code and refactor the code as you go along in life.
Yeah.
And so that the very bottom wouldn't change at all. And if the top got wider, then you instead of having a testing pyramid, you'd now have a testing square or rectangle. And maybe that's okay. I would almost imagine you wouldn't. The middle, the integration tests would become less important.
Yeah.
So you'd go from a pyramid to maybe two triangles.
Hourglass.
Yeah, an hourglass. That's the shape.
Yeah, I think I was making a joke about that in the first time we approached this topic. But that's my, like, we can already see, like, AI, it becomes pretty good. AI in its current state, as I'm using it with writing tests, unit tests. If you write
Mm-hmm.
good small functions and good code, it writes the tests for that pretty good. Does a pretty good
Mm-hmm.
job at that. So AI is doing a lot of the testing, test generation at least, and I have to go through and tinker with it every now and then and correct a couple of things. But it does a pretty good job at like testing a whole bunch of branches that I normally would just do the happy path flow because the test might take too long to write. And it can
Yeah.
test like a ton of branches very, very easily. And that's awesome. And so what I'm wondering is, like, in the future, do we get worse at writing unit tests because AI is handling it for us? And if it becomes easier to just end-to-end test it, right? Do engineers get lazier about not even writing unit tests? I know it's nice to have them, and you should have them professionally. But if you can go, okay, well, that switch is either on or off in this component, and my end-to-end test flow tests the on and off flow, why write a unit test for it? You know, I'm not saying anything is good or right. I'm just wondering what will happen, because just like what they
Yeah.
talk about with compute power, right? When compute becomes so much cheaper over time, that there's like we talked about constraints on hardware. Like when you release a video game, you have to
Mm-hmm.
optimize it because you've got a thing it fits on, and it can't be greater than the hardware running it. And if you got a web service, You can just add another container, add a double the size of the database. Or you are mainly just scaling horizontally, I guess, not vertically. So maybe not the database example. But if compute becomes so cheap, people don't write optimized code. They go, I don't really care. It runs fast enough. Who cares,
Right.
right? And so I'm wondering what will happen to the engineer of the future if tests become easy. Do we lose that as a skill because AI is doing it all for us?
I kind of think it'll go, the inevitable ebb and flow. Vibe coders,
Mm-hmm.
and by that I mean it almost not quite a pejorative, but I mean amateur coders more than vibe coders.
Okay.
Right? People who are not experienced and not doing it in a professional manner. They're going to write end-to-end tests because the AI will do that for them as well, and they'll have no idea what's going on.
Yeah.
And they'll fall into the exact main problem of vibe coding, which is changes are really, really hard because you don't have the unit tests. And I
Yeah.
think what will happen instead is people who are doing it more professionally, because AI makes it so easy to write unit tests, if you write your code in a way that makes it easier to unit test, it's going to actually, I think it will push developers towards a unit test friendly way of doing things. And then the AI will write the tests. And so
Hmm.
I think while non professionals will migrate towards integration, end to end tests, professionals are actually going to start having higher levels of unit tests, not written by themselves, but just higher levels of unit tests, because it makes life so much easier to change and refactor things, especially for
Yeah.
the AI.
Right.
Like if you have code and you have unit tests and you tell the AI to change something, it does a much better job if there's unit tests, or it's much
Yes.
easier
Mm-hmm.
if you have unit tests because then you know that the thing has changed.
Right. Refactoring becomes very easy. That's kind of a
Yeah.
good point. If you have like pretty much every single time, and I wanted to make like a little feedback loop at this before. That would be kind of a cool idea. But like having a system that can add coverage to itself, and then once it hits reasonable, like 100%, let's say 99% coverage, then tell itself to refactor itself and make sure the tests for against itself still pass.
Mm-hmm.
And then once it refactors itself, go back through and see, can I refactor my own tests and eliminate the tests that are no longer needed, and just kind of keep perfecting itself as a system without going too crazy with it. But you can't do that with intent tests. You'd have to have unit tests for that flow.
Right. I've got a friend who works at Charlie Lab, which is one of these agentic coding things. So it goes out and does the code for you. Like you describe what you want, it goes and gives you a PR
Mm-hmm.
basically. And one of the things that they've been doing is having it not quite gamification, but just every morning, here's a recommendation, here's a PR that is nothing but code cleanup.
Yeah.
And the idea being that here's the small thing, and you can say yes or no, and then the next day it'll give you another small thing and another small thing. And so behind the scenes, without you asking, it's sort of just helping you groom your code base and
Right.
making it more AI friendly over time. But without
Yeah.
having this giant, here's 10,000 changes in 300 files. It's like, here's
Yeah.
10 changes today, and tomorrow I'll give you 10 more changes. And, in a month, we'll have gone through 300 changes, and your code will be much easier to deal with for the AI, but you'll never
Yeah.
have been stressed.
What would be interesting too, just to go off on a slight tangent here, is if like one thing, first thing I think is like how can you describe to it the least risky part of your code, right?
Mm.
And if you could also plug it into like analytics, such that it sees each page that it routes to, and like the least trafficked page, then it would know, oh, I can touch the code related to the analytics related to the least trafficked page, and start there, you know,
Mm-hmm.
or things that are removed entirely. Um, so there's plenty I can see it doing. But back to the end-to-end flow, I think I'm wondering if even that shifts to where product describes end-to-end tests and tells it, write me a test for this page, and they do the product ends up doing the end-to-end test because it's so much more
Yes.
visual, right? And like developers might not even write end-to-end tests anymore. It's just like that's your job, product person, to make sure it visually behaves as the product is supposed to. you know.
Right. Product QA
Mm-hmm.
would be doing the end-to-end tests, Developers would still have unit tests
Yeah.
because the unit, like, I mean, sometimes I make a mistake and the unit test catches it, but most of the time, the value of writing my unit tests is that when I come back to refactor, inevitably, it's much easier,
Yeah.
and I don't
Yep.
worry about regression.
Totally.
The unit test is like 99% value in the future, and maybe 10% in the value today. It's always, not always, but it most of the cost of code is maintaining it and refactoring it going forward. It's not the cost of writing it.
Yeah.
It's the value of the unit. So I don't think unit tests will go away, but I like the hourglass
Yeah.
analogy.
The testing hourglass over time.
Yes.
Well, I guess time will tell.
Time will tell, like grains through an hourglass.
Oh,
These are the tests of our lives.
I haven't thought of that in years. Some of our listeners are like, what are they even referring to?
The stories.
All right.
Thank you all for listening. I'm Jeffrey Sherman.
And I'm Isaac Askew, and this is Never Rewrite.